The production of this video was made possible by donors to the Orchestration Online Patreon initiative. Please consider adding your support to the creation of free educational internet resources by visiting our Patreon page linked below.
Now, back to our website subscribers. There is no audio track, no mock-up for this particular entry that was submitted. So apologies, Cheaun, but yeah, I think after so many examples of scores submitted to this challenge, that people will pretty much get the idea of how this is scored and, what the sound of it is, right, by now. So let's start right from the very beginning. And this is kind of cool. You're really taking Bartok at his word here, with drums, right? With drums and pipes. So here we've got just, straight ahead, smacking the beats, just the main beats, prium, 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 prium. Okay, and it's just going to be a really, really steady, regular kind of thumping along here. And that is accentuated, on the upbeat by timpani and divisi cellos and contrabasses. So just, that'll work pretty good. Kind of miss the A in there. Maybe you were intending this F to be an A, or I don't know, maybe that's just the way that you heard it. So, it's fine. Anyhow, so that is pretty much going to work. It's going to be a kind of a more, it's going to be loud, but it's going to be a more intimate sound. There are going to be some things where you need to possibly fill in, this rather than just letting it be bare like that. Like if you want just a fuller sound, it might need just a little bit more support on those lower notes, like, maybe bassoons and contra, although you're sort of saving your contra for this solo passage. It looks to me, if this is, I don't know what notation app this is, but if this is Sibelius, it looks like if you're pulling down on these these bars to kind of create different groupings, different family groupings, then probably the best thing to do is to grab it here, pull it down to there, and then grab this one and pull it down to there, right? And that way the bars will show sections like they do, for the strings here. This goes a little too far and ends up in the horns. Yeah, I'm not sure which app this is, but it's nice. So going on, we've got just, the drums are just basically holding down the beat, and we've got tuba, contrabassoon, and lower strings just doing the kind of bump, 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 bump. Now, interestingly, you use timpani for the reaction, and the already used percussion, blum, 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 right? And the lower strings to react. So I'm just wondering here whether or not your reaction could have been done with instruments other than the ones that are already in play. Do you know what I mean? So you've got, you could have added another percussion instrument besides tam-tam. You could have had like a fourth percussion instrument that the percussionist could trade from that to this, like tenor drum. You could have had tenor drum on the reactions, to a degree. But timpani is pretty good just for kind of a percussive reaction. I don't know if you really need to add these guys, right? And as far as the lower strings are concerned, since they're already being used, to state the melody. Maybe this is a place where, like, bass trombone, trombones in general, added with bassoons, maybe bass clarinet. You could have used any of those options, or you could have used them in combination so that it doesn't just keep being strings all the time, right? So that the ear gets a little bit of a break from the strings playing. So that the reaction, also the danger here is that the reaction will turn into a perception by the listener of the melody, right? But it's still pretty good. Bum 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 bum. So an actual tuba and contrabassoon stuck together. In that case, the at the same dynamic for all of these instruments, the tuba is going to dominate. So I would say probably the best thing to do here would be to mark the tuba mezzo forte, and then you'll get a better balance, right? You'll get strings colored with contrabassoon, kind of that kind of grunty sound, plus the tuba kind of behind them, and giving them kind of a rounder sound. All right. And then you've got this hold here. The melody comes to an end. And what you have to understand is sforzando, forte, with both instruments just kind of plowing through all of the stuff that follows, it's really going to ring out and make it difficult for the listener to hear what is following. Now, of course, you are using very strong instruments here, the trombones and bass trombone. So, I mean, that's not going to have a huge problem playing over that, but still, I've recommended in other videos that people take the approach of forte piano, so that it's, ba, and then that can play. It'll definitely be heard in the background while the next part continues. Now, you keep going with your same exact strategy of holding down those downbeats in the untuned percussion, and you've got a roll here. Now, you don't really tell us what this X means. If you've got a book of percussion, percussion scoring tips, or if you've got a book of notation, notation procedures, well, that's great. Okay, but you really do have to tell the average score reader, and possibly a percussionist who doesn't know what you mean, what your X note means, right? Now, if this sort of triggers something in your notation software, that's also great. But we really need to know what this means. Like, what does an X head mean? Does it mean like you're using metal beaters, or you're just maybe you're scraping like a stick back and forth across the face of the tam-tam, which I kind of don't know. Now, this is kind of interesting, is that you only go to mezzo piano here, right? And then you have other instruments joining in mezzo piano, while your trombones and bass trombone are just honking away here, and bassoons. Now, in terms of balance, the way that this is scored, you really won't get a balance here with the trombones and the bassoons. The bassoons have pretty much just add a tiny little touch of color, and they won't be heard. Now, if you mark these bassoons fortissimo, then you got a fighting chance. Maybe F poco on your trombones. Then the bassoons and the trombones will blend better, right? There has to be some kind of balancing here. Now we get to this. This isn't too bad. I think I just really don't think you need to play to mark mezzo piano here. I mean it just really doesn't. It's not going to be balanced at all, right? And then you have bump 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 bump. This could be mezzo forte. Honestly speaking, maybe the mock-up, maybe the playback on your software just is playing your strings and your winds way too loud. That's kind of the suspicion that I'm getting by looking at how your markings are. But anyhow, this is kind of fun. Forte piano accent and then diminuendo, and then you got your little reaction, bum 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 bum, and timpani and untuned percussion. And then once again, these tam-tam rolls, and then they kind of continue on there, and you've got your horns. 2, 3, 4. Look, it is really better to try to put the second up on the first staff, even if it's just like second voice underneath all of this. It's just as easier on the conductor. Yeah, I mean, and maybe your notation software has some limitations. It's just better to do it this way. Like if you have this pianissimo underneath, and then you need a mezzo forte horn on top, and it just might not go together in terms of the right dynamic. So, that's understandable. I'm only analyzing up to here because that was the stipulation of the website and evaluations. But still, look, I mean, you got some cool stuff here. I wish that I could have heard a mock-up. Not that I really need one, but sometimes it's really useful to know what the arranger is hearing, right? And then like you can say to them, well, look, what your mock-up is telling you is wrong. Your brass are way too quiet. Your winds are way too loud. That wouldn't happen in real life. There are different little things where I could kind of clear up points for you as an arranger, and then you would have a much more rounded view of how things work in real life. So this, I'd like the idea of like the all percussion approach to the downbeat. That's cool. It really has not been done that much in these entries, and overall, this is really neat. I think it needs a lot of little adjusting and tweaking and stuff, and it's some things that you really might want to think about before you shared this with an orchestra. But it's still, it's got its heart in the right place, and it's got some really neat stuff. So look, congratulations! Thank you so much for entering this orchestration challenge for 2018, and I'm going to invite you, just as I will pretty much everybody who I've, all the entries that I've seen, to consider participating again in the next challenge. It's kind of cool that like I sometimes see people entering these challenges who have been contributing for years, and I see them improve and improve and improve. And sometimes even with the arrangers who are professionally experienced, and they're just doing this for fun. They don't really need my feedback, and sometimes I have like nothing to say but great things, or just like tiny differences of opinion. Even for those people, I see their craft deepening. Their artistic skills just really getting solid, and new insights kind of flowing from them, and that's also really exciting. So it's a great score to start off this little shorter compilation of entries, and there will be another one coming up in a few hours, and that will kind of take care of all the website entries. So thanks for your entry, Cheaun, and now I'm going to go on to the next one. The next entry for this compilation is from Danny, and yeah, I really enjoyed this. I think this is fun. It's some basic thoughts about it. Let's sort of see if we can untangle this a little bit. So you're starting off with very direct timpani plus bass drum. So what you have to think about that is that it's a very, very heavy sound, and it's a very, very regular sound, right? You might want to like maybe do an either or kind of a thing, like decide which one and then use the other one to react, right? So that the ear doesn't get tired of just kind of hearing that constant thumping. And the other thing to think about too is how much time does the timpanist have to change pitches, right? Because you are assigning you're assigning D, so that's 1, 2 on this E. A is 3, G sharp is 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right? So you've got 8 pitches here for your timpani. So you have to basically decide on a very narrow range of pitches, like 4 different pitches that you could possibly use, right? And sometimes the timpani pitch does not have to be exactly the same as the other bass pitch that is playing at the same time. Here's a good situation, like if you don't have the if you don't have all the pitches that you can double, then maybe let your bass drum cover, like, sort of trade off when you need the audience to sort of imagine that they heard a certain pitch, right? You can have the bass drum fill in a note or two or three, right? If other bass instruments are reacting, in these ways, and they're putting a lot of weight on certain lower pitches, and the bass drum plays along, it can sort of suggest those pitches without actually playing them, right? So that is one way for you to use more percussion there in a cool way. All right, so we just start off kind of thumping away, double bass on a D, bass drum, timpani on D, tuba on E, right? I think you need a little bit more E in there. If you had, I don't know, I mean, you're sort of using everybody as you go in future passages, so it's kind of hard to say what else could play that, but yeah, it's just something to think about. You might need a little bit more E in there. Okay, and then you just get a bit of barking from the third trombone. And yeah, so like there's nothing that you've really scored here that couldn't be played by a standard third trombone with an F trigger. But I would sort of suggest, just kind of given the weight of what you want to do and the security of these notes, these lower notes, it'd probably be better if this were a actual standard bass trombone. And you just would get, I think you just get more secure, more rich lower notes. All right, so trombone plus cello, that can work, but you kind of need a little bit of balancing here, right? So, molto forte on the cello, right? Or even fortissimo to a degree. That is what you need in order to balance such an exposed passage, especially when it gets really thick here, and you've added the contrabassoon here and the two bassoons working together. A two on that line. This is going to be massive. Like what you're hearing in your mock-up is, I mean, it's not the real tones of those instruments, but it is definitely going to be a situation where it's kind of like a kind of honky sort of sound is going to be working with the way that you've got it scored here, right? So if you need more of a definite string sound, I would say go to fortissimo when you get to the melody, right? So like here this is fine with the double bass down there on a forte. Then you could jump to fortissimo here, right? And you could leave the bassoons where they are, or you could make them louder. If you want a more blended sound, but that should be enough to kind of keep this from being too much just trombones with, oh, by the way, there's some strings there that you can't hear, right? You don't want to end up like that, okay? So, otherwise, this is very, very fat, three trombones playing at once. I don't know if you've done some score reading and heard like a triple trombone unison, but they are huge. It's just like a bunch of really big, burly guys yelling at the top of their lungs. They just like have this. It's like a massive male chorus kind of a sound when you have all three of them, and it's can be earth-shattering. So just be careful how much you all add all together. Two trombones at once, that's pretty powerful already. So, you might want to rethink this a little bit. Maybe if you left out, like, turn this into bass trombone, left this out, and then had the bass trombone come back in at the end to react. All right? That might work better. Right? And then you wouldn't have to worry about overbalancing. Or, look, you got the contra down here and the double bass down here. If this is a bass trombone, then just drop this an octave, and then you have a really balanced sound all the way across, right? Anyways, so that would be my instincts for that. And then, just little reaction. Going ahead to here, the clarinets, bass clarinet, horns, take over. Now, okay, so we have a problem in here that you have marked 1, 2, 3, 4. I think you should mark 1, 3, 2, 2, 4 if you're going to do this sort of A2. And you might have seen in some of my other videos where I have a Sibelius score and I just actively just turn this into octaves for both parts. That's how you would score it if this were, if this were scored in a standard way. And I actually kind of like that. I like the way that it looks. It just really has a very immediate, obvious look to the conductor, right? Then here you're going to like 4-horn unison. So, it doesn't really matter what you do here. The horns are going to dominate, right? You could have the horns come in at mezzo forte and your winds here, your clarinets be be forte, right? Or you could do forte and fortissimo. Doesn't matter. The sound of all 4 of these horns playing along like this is really going to be the dominant sound, right? So there are ways around it. You can cut it down to just 2 horns, like playing in octaves and then unison. Then that will take care of it. Then that can work way better along with the clarinets that you have scored here. Okay, that would be a much less risky solution, right? And then, then you just have your little hits coming in. This is actually pretty strong. You've got bassoons, like A2 bassoons, contra, trombone, both trombones, tuba, timpani, lower strings. It's really going to, is going to be really powerful, right? I do like the fact that you cut down this to mezzo forte underneath the next upcoming melody. So, that could be just that your playback was just getting too interfering, and that's fair enough. It's a little heavy, though, to have that, to have this really, really low double bass just continuing on here. Might have been better if you reserved your double bass to do this job here, right? That the contra is doing, and the bass drum and tuba are doing, to play along with that rather than just holding this long note here at mezzo forte. It's really going to get buried a bit by the more active players, right? All right. And then you've got your, dun 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 dun. So why not clarinets? Bump, 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 bump. Clarinets hold along with the strings, and that way this reaction, bump, 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 does not just completely bury the, obliterate the strings. You need a little bit more support there. Could also be a good place for the trumpets to come in and lend a little bit of support too, right? So anyway, just a suggestion for everybody, not just Danny here, and that is, let's say that you just score 21 bars or whatever, a short amount because you're a website subscriber, you want to get in on the challenge, and that's great. That really is, kind of the core of what we're doing here. Okay, great. And then you start off with a big old orchestra like this, and then you submit your entry as a PDF. Why not just cut off all the extra stuff? Get rid of the empty bars and get rid of the empty staves. So if you're really not going to use 3 trumpets, then just get rid of those staves, right? If you only need 1 percussion staff, get rid of that. And then format your score so that the staves get to a larger size, I mean, in this case, we didn't really need all of these upper winds, right? They could have been cut as well. And then you could have had a larger staff size overall, and then it would be really easy to read on a smaller screen, right? So think about me, helping you with your score layouts. And of course, if you are working with Sibelius, it's always best to send me the Sibelius score, because then I can do the layouts for you to a degree, right? So anyways, consider all those things. Very cool. I don't know, Danny. I don't think I've seen you in these challenges before, and if I have, then I apologize. But really cool basic idea, and getting your feet wet here. That's awesome. So please do consider jumping into the next orchestration challenge when it comes up in a year, I've got a real cool score for us all to orchestrate. So, hope to see you entering these challenges again. Now on to the next score. Now we've got Jamie Watson's entry, and this is really kind of cool in the way that it avoids percussion, right? With drums and pipes, well, we just kind of don't really hear any drums all that much until the end. There's a little bit of timpani, and then more aggressive timpani. And for all that, I think that it's a nice, it's really kind of a nice way to change things up, right? I mean, I think it's really cool that there is no perfect approach to this. There is no one authoritative final word on how to do this, unless, of course, Bartok himself were to have scored this, which apparently he was interested in scoring this. I've heard that he had mentioned to one of his students that he was working on scoring the at least the first movement of this piano suite, and that he was introducing the melody with trombones, right? So I'm kind of glad that I didn't know that before I started. Before I started working on my own. But back to my point is that there is no one final approach to this, really, and so if there is a wide variety of different ways of tackling it, I think that that's totally great. And this is the perhaps least percussion heavy of the fully orchestrally scored entries that we've gotten so far. There was a octet version that had, I think, no percussion at all, which is fair enough. But this really goes light on the different elements. So just a few comments here about score layout, and that is, usually horn and F, these two, it would just be like one particular horn, and the way that you set that up is you would go to this one, and where it says extra staff above or below, you would add that here. Let's say below, and then you would have the name floating in between the two, right? The other thing too is that it's not enough just to say flutes, oboes, blah de blah de blah. You really have got to tell us how many, right? 2 flutes, 2 oboes, 2 clarinets and B flat, and so on. And 4 horns and F, right? And then the final thing too is that usually snare drum is higher than bass drum. Now there is no actual standard layout. I mean, there are some proposed standard layouts, but then each score has got its own logic to it. And if there is some prevailing reason to put the snare drum below the bass drum, then that's perfectly fine. Like sometimes you'll see instruments grouped by which percussionist should play what, right? And you might see instruments in all different kinds of setups, right? Like for instance, you might have one player who is playing like pretty much everything that they can walk around and stand in front of and hit with a beater. Like you might have one percussionist handling bass drum and tam-tam and tubular bells, and then you might have the other percussionist having everything on a stand in front of them, like, and hitting with snare sticks. So you might have the other percussionist playing suspended cymbal, snare drum, tenor drum, and so on and so forth. So it just depends on what goes where. I once had a layout where it said, just percussionist 1 was handling this particular section of instruments, percussionist 2, percussionist 3, and they were just numbered arbitrarily. And the the principal percussionist told me, look, you're giving percussion 3 all this stuff to do. You got them playing mallets, and you've got them playing tom-toms, and all this really complicated polyrhythmic stuff. That should be percussion 1. But the reason why it was percussion 3 was because I was just so used to putting the mallet instruments on the bottom, right? So, so it just really, in the end, it doesn't matter. Okay. So now let's talk about your score here, Jamie. Let's get back to it. All right, so we're starting off just stating those divisi, staccato, just chugging along here, and then having the double bass and contrabassoon. Yeah, I kind of prefer double bass. When you're working with Sibelius, it gives you everything in a row and it says contrabass, and I think that's kind of more of a maybe is that more of a British thing or something? I don't know, but I really prefer double bass because that way you don't get contra. You don't get your contras mixed up. Sort of like double bassoon and contrabass. I'd really rather have double bass and contrabassoon, right? Anyway. But yeah, anyhow, so double bass, chugging away on that. We've also contrabassoon on the same note, and bass clarinet in B flat. I just want to check something really quick. Yeah, transposing score. Okie doke. So yeah, so that is indeed an A. And all right, so moving on, we've got bassoons and horns in octaves coming in with first violin. Now, I think that you could have added viola there, right? So that we had octave horn and bassoons along with octave strings. I really like this idea. Not that I would score it myself, but I really like the uniqueness of this idea. Rather than kind of barking out those melodic notes, you treat them as just really nice long tenuto notes. Or sorry, I keep thinking that we're here when I'm sort of humming along to myself in my brain. So yeah, the drop off is a little strange though, right? Dun dun dun, nothing. All right, it's just a little weird. And then, of course, you're throwing in these oboes doing a crescendo here. I do like the variety of throwing in clarinets, right? But keep it, or first clarinet, but keep in mind that this will not really sound like a whole lot because it is doubling the first horn at pitch, right? So it's just, you've got a A2 unison here. Now, it's cool that you've got first and second violins coming in and playing octaves. I almost feel like, why not put the clarinet up there, right? To double with the first violin, and then the first horn can double the second violins, right? And then, of course, we've got just a touch of percussion and lower strings reacting to this longer note in the melody. And that's all good. Staccatissimo, that's fine. Look, this isn't going to really sound like much, even though, you've backed way off on your dynamics on everything, and they're pretty workable for this kind of arrangement. Just the harp, this low note is really not going to, If you were to make this into an octave and you were to mark it fortissimo, all right, then you could kind of hear it, right? But, yeah, I just try not to add harp to places where you've got bass drum and contrabassoon and bassoons playing, and if everybody was playing like mezzo piano and the harp was marked forte, you would hear the harp. Okay, but it's just too big, too much, and this harp is just kind of an afterthought, really. Okay, dun 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 dun. So you got sforzando crescendo. It's already forte, and then when you get to the rest, you're kind of left hanging with just the violins. So the sudden absence of bassoons and horns is going to be heard, right? And you're just going to have this kind of hanging under it. So if that's what you really want, then that's what you're going to get. Okay, so continuing on, we've got the same strategy of just digging in and we've sort of added an octave here by having the violas take over on E. There's no sort of D sound really coming from anybody now, right? There isn't the sense of E seconds anymore. So you might want to, you've got D in the timpani. Yeah, not so sure if that works for me. But yeah, so it's kind of a either or type situation. I just feel that there needs to be kind of a slightly fuller sound of like expressing the idea of an E second in there, rather than just octave, E octaves on the middle strings and D's in the timpani. Just I don't feel it completely forms the sense of harmony that is right there. Okay, but that's just my preference, I guess. Now we've got bassoons and horns continuing on with the second statement of the melody, and here is where I would take issue to a degree. You really haven't changed all that much from this, right? So you're not really offering a whole lot new except for articulation of those notes, right? You're keeping them short here instead of long. But in terms of like the overall orchestral sound, it's the biggest difference really is just this held E and timpani playing the Ds, right? But pretty much everything else is really similar to what happened before. So just if I can give some advice to everybody doing these orchestration challenges, try to if you only have 22 bars, try to do as much as you can with them in terms of like different ideas and different things, because that gets the most feedback out of me of like constructive things that I could say, about your scoring and your approaches. And even if it's like a really dumb idea, I can have tons of fun talking about it and looking it over, analyzing it, massaging it a little bit. And then, that makes me more interested in what I'm doing and might lead to, further orchestration tips and so on. This is kind of cool. I'm guessing that this is, this is both still principal players, first oboe and first clarinet, because you said one here. You probably should mark it again after this tacit, all right, just so we know, or the player knows. Yeah, bum 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 bum. I feel like there needs to be a little bit more weight on this, like alternate melody note. Whether it was a stroke from the snare drum or and also being longer, kind of, sort of, it kind of interferes with its function as an alternate melodic note, as kind of like just a thrown in melodic note. What if this were played like just as a accented eighth note with the bass clarinet coming in as well, like an octave higher, or snare drum hit, or even like here's where you could hear the harp, right? That would come in, if you did a harp octave there. Now this, is not going to be heard because there's just so much going on, that you've got off 4 horns, right? Plus trumpets. And, bassoon and so on. So like these little notes here from the harp are just completely insignificant. Now, if they were like pitched up like 3 octaves and marked fortissimo, then you would hear them, right? Okay, bum 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 bum. Check out one of. If I get permission to release all of my Brev entries from the Patreon, then check out some of them. They might come available in a couple of days, because there was one of our entrants used celesta and harp, playing very high and doubling this from above, and it sounded really great. All right, now you've got enormous weight here. This is just huge weight, and I'm not seeing any. I'm seeing very few dynamic markings at entries. Right? How loud is this supposed to be? We don't know. How about timpani and bass drum? Would be really important to know what kind of force you intend the players to use. And of course, here when we have these big unisons, you have 4 players up on this little passage here and holding this. And 3 players below, you have 3 clarinets. So that's a big orchestra. That's 4 clarinets. That actually goes outside of what I assigned, right? Unless you're saying like, hey, after playing these couple notes, bass clarinet is changed to 3rd clarinet, and then that would be kosher, right? But as it is right now, it's not quite kosher to the stipulations of the event description. Don't worry about it. I'm not going to be mean to everybody, but I'm just pointing that out. Like, when you start to add more players, like, if you have 3 oboes and 2 English horns or something like that. One entry had 2 oboes and 2 English horns, which was also a little bit outside the pale, but I let it slide. But if everybody started turning in massive 10 bassoons and 8 horns and 15 trombones, that's just that starts to become band scoring. Really, it's like not my specialty. And also making do with the means that you've got is a really important skill in orchestration. Just if you have been given a certain limited scope of instruments, you've got to make that score sound like if you have a 45-piece orchestra, you've got to make it sound like a 110-piece orchestra, right? Recently I got yesterday. I had some preliminary discussions with a manager, orchestra manager, about how big of an orchestra to assign to a project that I'm going to be involved in. And she asked me, how big should the orchestra be? I can afford 25 string players now, and I can afford up to 45 players total. So what should that be? And seeing as how this was a crossover concert, I knew exactly what to ask for. So, yeah. Anyway, so I love this right here. Staccatissimo twice, bip, bip, and then pow, right? So here's where dynamic marking is so important, right? So like we need to know how loud everything is here. I would say fortissimo. Don't diminuendo till the end, right? And then just have this, double F, bump, bump, pow, bump, bump, pow. And I think that really sets up the next section really well. Okay, so I'm giving extra time on all of these, just kind of really going overboard, and I'm enjoying myself. It's Saturday morning here in Wellington, and it's beautifully sunny, even though it's winter down here. We've got a really nice day, and I've got the whole place to myself for the whole weekend, and I'm taking care of all these evaluations. And just really, thanks everybody for sending me such cool, such uniquely individual attempts to orchestrate. Well, attempts. I mean, you are orchestrating. It's not an attempt. So anyways, thanks a lot. So let's look at our last entry, and then I will make another compilation video after lunch. Our last score for this compilation, I don't know what particular application this is scored in. Maybe MuseScore or LilyPond, or it's something that I'm not really aware of that much. This is kind of a cool score, JR. I mean, I think some things, would be a little bit more clear to you in your scoring if you had maybe like a more a more comprehensive app with like a better sound set. I mean, I'm not one to be recommending that people necessarily score to the sound of their sound set. But, there are just a lot of things in here that, where I feel that the sounds, like not only the sound set, but the notation app itself might be kind of misleading you a little bit as to what things should sound like and so on, and and like kind of the quality of different tones. Okay, but having said that, I really do think that this is a fun score, and it has some neat aspects to it. Like it's almost more like a band score in a way. You've got soprillo saxophone, pretty rare, outside of a band situation, and two soprano saxophones, and no flutes, right? Then we've got, two oboes, cor anglais, two E-flat clarinets, not two B-flat clarinets, and bass clarinet, and then bassoons and contra. So, yeah, I mean, not a lot of lower winds happening in here. I mean, yeah, you have bass clarinet, bassoons, contra, and you got cor anglais, right? But when you go to E-flat clarinets, that sort of takes away the Chalumeau register of the B-flat that you could be relying on for, more kind of low sounds that go along with this lower scoring. And of course, baritone sax would have been great as something to add here. Anyhow, but still cool idea. You got a couple of harps in there. All right, now let's just see where we go. So, starting off with cellos and contras playing in minor sevenths and just kind of like crashing along there. Now, there's kind of a lack of consistency in marking dynamics. That's a really, really important thing. It's also extremely important to tell us how many of each player that you're using, right? 3 trombones, but how many trombones are being played at this entrance? 2 bassoonists, how many bassoons, right? You just need to say, like, if it's only one bassoon, you say 1 period, right? If it's both bassoonists, you say A2, right? And it seems to me that this is second bassoon, right? Because then the first comes in right here. So clearing up those little points really matters a lot. And if you're going to have 4 horns, it's better to have 2 staves, right? Okay. I feel this goes on quite a bit. We end up with 8 bars of intro, before other things emerge. So this is just going to sort of plod along for quite a while. After a while, you sort of started to notice, when you have it on sound sets that are really predictable in the way that they articulate things, and every single note being the same, it starts to sort of sound like a stuck clothes washer. You know what I mean? Washing machine, kind of going ka-chunk, ka-chunk, ka-chunk. So watch out for that. I mean, it's not going to happen in a real life situation where every note is just slightly, subtly different. But better sound sets will also take care of that problem. And yet, it just does seem to me a long time to be going on with the same exact dynamic and everything else. Now, if you had intended this to be like maybe pianissimo and just to slowly emerge and get louder and louder and louder, that would be a cool idea. But how loud is it getting, right? There's like no dynamic level on any of this. So I don't really know, what is meant. Is this meant to be accented? Pow. And also, it's kind of neat the way that you've changed things around. I like the fact that, you have this very morbid sounding tuba kind of coming out of the almost like out of the smoke and haze, right? It's just sort of emerging. And also, contrabassoon, right? Piano crescendo, like hairpins are fine. I mean, you don't really need to use the crescendo dashes. I mean, if you're only covering a few bars, then hairpins are totally fine. Okay, and then little flam here on the bass drum, pretty much. Okay. Now, somehow the melody starts to come out, and what you've chosen for that is kind of, I don't know, it's sort of strange the way that this kind of comes about. It almost feels like an add-on, and then suddenly you're in the middle of it right here. So it's a little less predictable, but yeah. Adding the occasional trombone note here is going to distract from the fact that the melody, it starts off with these 4 isolated notes, or in this case, I guess, 5 isolated notes. Kind of cool, though. I mean, like this can obscure this, right? You're playing on the same exact pitches, right? So if you got that, here you got it sort of more in the background mezzo piano, but then this would need to be marked forte to really make it work, right? We need some foreground texture to the melody. It just, otherwise, like, kind of nothing happens. Now, did you notice that, when you add all these slurs to your playback, the sort of the smoothness of it works against, and also the smoothness of this reaction with the slurs. It sort of works against the very punctuated rhythm that is working around it. So what you have to decide is whether or not that is a good contrast, as we've seen in some of these scores, or whether it is something that kind of covers the sound or confuses the feeling, right? I felt in this case there were some parts where you had a really good contrast, and other parts, like, it confused the feeling of the motion of the music. Like, the slurs in the melody were great, but the slurs in the reaction, I felt, sort of dragged down the energy and the momentum of the music a bit. Yeah. Okay, so first bassoon takes over on the melodic statement, along with, I guess this is first horn, or how many horns, I don't know. Still kind of playing off the idea of the strings kind of pounding away. Now, I think that this is neat, that you actually have, right here you've got D, E, D, E, and that is played an octave lower in the timpani. That's kind of cool, with a more active snare drum part. Really, I barely listened to your mock-up. I felt that the sounds were just distracting me from what was going on the page, and in fact, I really don't need to listen to mock-ups. I can see what it sounds like in my head just looking at it. But sometimes I like to listen to it just to know what you think it sounds like, right? Or what you have come up with in your mock-up. Sometimes that can be really useful in guiding me to tell you what to get around in your scoring. If your mock-up has been misleading you, or it has been sort of portraying orchestral sound in a certain light, where it could be possibly sounding much different with a different approach. Like, the thing that I'm thinking of mostly is, like, when you have very film score sounding sound sets in your attached to your notation software, and then you are scoring a lot of concert music, which has kind of a different aesthetic, right? Then it can be hard to sort of reconcile those two. All right, so dun 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 dun. Do you really want that? Or dun 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 dun. All right, which has a little bit more drive to it, right? And then once again, we have the slurred reaction to it. And then, just kind of takes over, continuing on slurred. Okay, so was this because your timpani or your notation software doesn't do a roll? It doesn't respond to, like, if you mark a note and then you put a triple beam on the stem, it doesn't react with a tremolo. I'm just kind of wondering why these are written out completely, right? It just is a little strange. I think you mentioned something about difficulties with possibly with playback in the way that the score layout and everything else. Don't worry about those things. I'm used to reading Muse scores and other scores that where the layout isn't really intended to be professional, more as reference, or as a I've heard that Muse score is really, really fun to score on. That it is really an enjoyable app. For a lot of the approach of a lot of players, and I respect that. But yeah, maybe there's some things that maybe you are ready to move up to a different notation app. Once again, I don't know which one this is. Okay, here this is perfectly fine. Don't tie across the bar when you're dealing with a bass drum or a snare drum. Just the concert hall is the sound of the tie, right? So it's better just to mark it in the simplest rhythm possible, right? So just don't tie and just leave a rest here, right? Same thing here, and you'll be fine. Now, going on here, we're seeing the sopranino saxophone and the soprano saxophone come in here. Now, did you notice that, like, when you get to here, it sort of starts to sound very circusy? Okay. Part of the reason for that is that you're stacking so many octaves that it is really sort of sounding like a circus organ or a pipe organ. So what I really recommend with that is to try to lay off the octaves, right? Is try to and try not to just sort of stack them all in sequence like this. And it's sort of like there's so much power and so many instruments given to this melodic idea. I feel kind of interferes with that, bum 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 idea, right? And right here, like this is going to be audible, but these lower pitches really are just really going to be hard to hear them against the bass drum and this tuba note and the crescendo timpani. And then once you get to here, this kind of idea here, there are a lot of things wrong with it. Okay, like you're asking the harpist to change pitches and play things chromatically. And this would take a huge amount of pedal changing in a very short amount of time, right? So you cannot think of harps as chromatic instruments. They can do certain chromatic passages with very, very tricky tuning. Like, say, if this was tuned B flat and that was A and this was G sharp, and then they made a quick shift from G sharp to G natural, and then they played the tuning of F sharp and then E sharp, then they could get to here with just one quick pedal change. But then you've got E natural, right, and then E flat, and then a D, right, and then this is just too fussy. Like you can do this slowly on a harp, but like in the given time, you just do not have time, right? And then here you've got an ottava over a bass clef. So here's where you should just go to treble clef, right, and then just mark this without the ottava in treble clef. And then here, you don't really need the ottava until you get to like this note, and maybe not even then. Do you know what I mean? I think it would be fine just like as a high G. It would work out perfectly well. So you could just get rid of these ottavas and score this lower staff in treble clef. Okay. And this actually does have a chance of being heard if you just lighten up the higher texture here. Right, when you add those saxophones on top, just they have a cutting, they have a very prominent tone, and they can just really kind of blot out everything else, right? So yeah, I noticed that you are keeping things like the highest note being F, and that is good, just as a kind of a standard benchmark. Of course, saxophone players can go higher than F, but it's just like it's a good kind of it's a good standard upper limit, and then just kind of check if you're going to do a lot of scoring above F, that the player is able to get all the different fingerings up there and is experienced with that. What you have to understand about saxophone is that often the saxophonist will be recruited from the clarinet section, and they may not have that much experience on saxophone. So if you add a lot of saxophones to an orchestral score, you just really have to kind of know who you're dealing with, who you're going to work with. All right. And this is kind of strange. You've got this D, E, D, C sharp thing, and I'm kind of unclear whether or not the lower note is supposed to be ottava or not. Like, it would be better to score things like this. Do you see what I'm saying? If this is an E that is not ottava. And maybe you scored it that way just because you were running out of space. I don't know. Whatever. Maybe the format of your notation software has sort of a vertical limit in between staves and so on. It just really looks to me like you were ready to go on to something a little bit more advanced, I mean, I think, Sibelius first, that might only allow like 16 staves, but it would be good training, and good first step, and I think it's free now, or just like almost costs nothing. So anyway, so consider that. So, like, from here on, I just feel like there are, there's kind of is not a whole lot to say except that just things are really stacked way too much, and it's interfering with, I mean, like, if I were to try to pick this apart, and by the way, our evaluation ends right here. So, despite the fact that you scored, I think, pretty much the whole movement, which I think is great. It just shows really, really great application. But I'm only analyzing up to there. So here I feel there's just too much stacking in terms of octaves, and like I could go on all day, and I would just end up rewriting your whole thing with suggestions. So I would just say, like, try not to have so much doubling and so many things stacked, and try to say things more texturally, and try to cut down on the amount that you add, and then you'll kind of also take care of that sort of sense that things sort of sound organ-like. Okay? So look, thought just a terrific effort, JR, and really enjoyed looking at it, and it's a cool way to end this compilation. And I'm going to go have some lunch now and enjoy the sunshine outside, and then I'll come back for the second set of website evaluations, actually the last set, the last 4 entries. Okay, thanks so much, everyone.